Hi guys, it's Kirsty. Today I want to do a video about feeling ourselves again. So kind of looking at that fixation on wanting to be how we were before we got really stuck. But before I go into that, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with the new videos as they're released. So the reason I wanted to do a video about this is because I personally found myself quite fixated on how I went from being unstuck to stuck within a matter of seconds. And I've noticed that a lot of other OCD sufferers that I've spoken to are quite fixated on the same thing, so quite often refer to the way I was before. And I think, again, it's before they got like badly stuck on the particular theme. So just the moment just before their OCD got particularly severe. So for me, I can literally, I could tell you the exact date and the hour and rough minute that I got extremely stuck on ROCD. And I kept on thinking, I can't believe how different I feel now compared to before that. And I kept thinking that for so long. But I think there's several things to this that actually are slightly problematic, is that we can find ourselves being extremely focused on getting back to how we were. In terms of, trying to get rid of OCD and force it away, etc. But what we're also probably doing here, and I know certainly I was, when I wanted to get back to me before ROCD, I was looking back at myself and the way I felt with rose-tinted specs. Because actually, when I look back on that period before my OCD hooked badly, I was struggling a lot with anxiety generally, over worrying about work and, fixating on our OCD type thoughts, and also health OCD as well. And I was performing compulsions, but not quite to the extreme standard. And now when I think about the things that I'm doing now with my time and and this is not me, I'm not OCD free, don't get me wrong. But now with the things I know now and the skills I have now, and I think about how I spend my time and the way I can approach certain situations, in hindsight, I would kind of rather be where I am now than where I was then. And this is why I wanted to do this video. Because it's a good way of also disputing against fear of fear, is looking at the new things that you're going to learn in your recovery journey and the way your perspective is going to change on certain things and how that's going to benefit you in your life going forward, as well as kind of, lifting you, helping you become less stuck, and helping you recover from your OCD. I think it's important to remember, OCD is characterized by very black and white thinking. So we can think about before we got stuck badly, that time being really good. But if you're realistic about it, you probably were performing compulsions. Whereas now when you got to your worst spot just after that was the call for help, really. That was, your body, your mind saying, it's time to change. I can't go on like this. So when you get to that really bad, lowest of the low point, that is the turning point. And even though the suffering in that point and going forward for the next few months or even year, whatever it ends up being, before, you start to see some, before you get on your recovery journey and start to see progress, that period of suffering is the period that leads you to make a change, because you probably were coasting along before. So the you before your OCD got really bad and you got really stuck, it wouldn't, I imagine there were compulsions, there were intrusive thoughts, there was some suffering, but it was enough for you to be able to get on with your life and maybe not even you know, be doubting what's going on, but not know for definite it's OCD. But that turning point where it got really bad, that was the bit that made you research OCD and come to the conclusion or get the diagnosis that you needed to say that you have OCD. And that was your time to look for, you know, treatment or to start working on your recovery. So without that turning point, you wouldn't have got to this point to get on your recovery journey. Another point I'd like to make here is that we are ever changing. So as we learn new things and we acquire new knowledge or new skills and new experiences, new memories, we are always changing. So we'll never get back, like I will never get back that me before my ROCD kicked in quite severely. And like it went, so that's kind of an acceptance in itself. But the other points that I'm talking about here are the things that can help you accept this, because it's kind of really looking at it realistically rather than with the rose-tinted glasses and the black and white perspective. It's really looking at it. Was life really that wonderful before it got really bad? I mean, okay, so you were, you know, your anxiety wasn't as high, but maybe you needed your anxiety to get high to get you to the point where you start to make the changes necessary to improve your life. And the skills that the things that you're learning whilst watching this channel from other OCD sufferers, you're not going to unlearn that. So because you've learnt that, you already know more than you knew before your OCD got really bad. So, you know, what I'm saying is you're not going to go back to that point. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yes, you want to suffer less. And yes, you want to get to the point of functioning that you were at before your OCD got really bad. But what I want to say here is that when you do get to that point where your functioning is up to that level, you're going back to work again, or you're doing less compulsions again, maybe you're having less intrusive thoughts again, and your anxiety is coming down and you're socializing again, you will be doing all those things with more knowledge than you had before. And that knowledge can not only be put to use in your OCD recovery or anxiety recovery, but also in the rest of your life. And I would like to give some examples here. For me, I mean, for a long time, I was suffering badly with like work-related anxiety. And it was only when my ROCD kicked in badly and I was signed off work that I could let go a little bit of how tightly I was holding on to being successful at work, basically because I had to. And it, you know, took a bit more time, being at the old job that I was in, whilst working on my OCD recovery. But I reached the point where I decided that I didn't want to do that job anymore. It just wasn't making me happy. And that even if that meant going into a more junior role in a different industry, I was willing to let go of, you know, the expectations of myself, I suppose, and accept that. And that kind of gave me the courage that I needed to hand in my notice and look elsewhere. So there's just many ways that we can use the things that we've learned on our OCD recovery journeys to our advantage outside of OCD recovery. And you wouldn't have had that at that point before the theme that got you very latched on kicked in. And when you were at that point before your OCD got really, really bad, you were kind of maybe blissfully unaware potentially that the OCD was going to kick in. And if you keep kind of holding on to that point, you know, saying if only I could go back to feeling like that, that is the opposite of acceptance, because you'll make your reasoning with the world. And that isn't what happened. Your OCD did get bad and it did latch on. But who's to say that wouldn't have been waiting to happen anyway? See, you may have lived more of your life without that happening to a kind of lower standard in some ways, because you would still have been feeling a bit anxious probably, and you were still doing some compulsions, and you don't need to live life in an anxious way, and you don't need to live your life feeling like you need to do compulsions. That's not the way we have to live our lives. We can choose to live our lives in a different way, and this is what we learn about in our OCD recovery journey. So I hope that some of these points that I've talked about can help you to see yourself before OCD, maybe in a less black and white way, to see that, to maybe make you rethink. I mean, was it really that wonderful beforehand? Yes, it's harder now, but maybe going through this harder period is the thing that I need to do to get me to that higher quality of life that I would like to be at, rather than kind of coasting along, which is what you may have been doing before, with a degree of anxiety and irrational thinking. But also, you know, that there's things that you will have gained maybe greater knowledge about, because you're having to try that bit extra, I suppose, to have some structure to your day. So you learn about gratitude, you know, maybe about mindfulness, maybe you take up exercise that you weren't doing before. These things, again, you won't forget. These things are additions to your life. They're new skills that you can use in your life, and you may not have had them before. You may not have pushed yourself in those ways before. Like the resilience that you've gained to be even at this point that you didn't have previously, that's not going to go away. So what I wanted to do was to give you some arguments. So when you have these thoughts about, oh, I wish I could go back to before, oh, it would be amazing if I could go back to before, it's awful how different I am, you can just start disputing that. So to stop you from putting that state that you were in before OCD got really bad on a pedestal. But also these are ways for you to examine the fact that you can stand the way that you feel right now, and like examining that potential and likely fear of fear as well that most of us do end up developing, because it is pretty traumatizing, OCD at its worst, when you don't know what's going on. And the fear of being in that position, it sticks with you for a while. And if you need to start disputing fear of fear and being able to stand having OCD and being afraid of going back to the worst place that you were in, you can look at these new skills. And if you can take even one good thing that's come out of it, then that shows you that it's not awful. It's bad, but it's not awful. And again, that can help you to reduce the amount that you're awfulizing. And especially when you stop holding it up on a pedestal the way you felt the day before your OCD hooked on severely to a specific theme. You know, you can stop comparing that as being, oh, I felt so wonderful and then I felt awful. You can start to kind of even them up a little bit and start to feel a bit more optimistic about the things that you can gain from it. And this is, again, I must stress here, this is not me saying having OCD is good. It is not good. But there are things that we can gain and learn about in our recovery journey from our suffering that other people wouldn't necessarily have. So there are some ways that you can use later on your suffering to your advantage. Doesn't mean you haven't suffered, but you can use it to your advantage. And I am actually going to be talking about one of the other books on the reading list, which is quite relevant to this topic, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was in a Nazi concentration camp in the Second World War. It's an absolutely brilliant book, and I will be doing a video about that. But that's relevant because Viktor Frankl talks about the sort of adding meaning, taking meaning from suffering to try and view it from a different perspective, and that is relevant to what I'm saying here. But I hope this video has been useful to you, and thank you ever so much for watching. Stay safe, everyone. Bye.